Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of This weekend. I have my best friend Connie returning as my special guest, as we have finally decided to sit down and review The Child Thief by Brom. And even though this book had been on my TBR for quite some time, it was Connie who had gone through my library and decided that this was going to be our next read. So, since this is a book she decided on, for the last 10 or 15 years, I've always referred to her as Picky. And of course, with her blessing, we're calling this review a Picky Pick review. Now, before I get started, I would just like to note that we buddy read this with my husband Carrie, as well as our local good friend Aaron, and our good online friend Hanny. And of course, we had a great time reading this with all of them because it allowed us to get into some pretty deep discussions about the characters, themes, lores, and all of the twists and turns that this thought-provoking novel presented. But without me getting too far ahead of myself, let's see what's been new with Connie.
Hey guys, I'm so happy to be back. And I am really excited to dig into The Child Thief. I've always been such a big fan of Peter Pan.
Likewise. And also, fun fact, a few years ago, we actually got matching tattoos of Peter Pan and Tinkerbell. And when they line up together, they say a complete phrase.
Mm-hmm.
So this was for your birthday, I think.
I believe so.
Yeah, it was done by our good friend Courtney Collette. Mm-hmm. And we'll, of course, include links to her profile in the description section of this video. But would you like to show off our tattoos?
Sure.
Awesome. Let's do it.
All right.
Well, those are our tattoos, and I know they're kind of faded because they're like, 5 or 6 years old at this point?
Yeah.
But when we stand together, like how you saw in the photo, they read, "Think the happiest of things, it's the same as having wings." So, yeah, I'm really glad I got that with you.
Me too. Me too. I love it.
But as you were saying, continue on with your updates.
But, that's pretty much what's going on with me. Work, home, Ben. We just celebrated Ben's seventh birthday. He's getting big on me. So happy birthday, Ben.
Happy birthday, Ben.
And send him healing vibes. He did just accidentally break his arm. And my grandpa, too, he had a health scare. But other than that, I've just been getting my yard spring ready. And that's pretty much what's been going on with me.
Awesome. Well, we would like to thank Hanny, Carrie, and Aaron for buddy reading this with us. Mm-hmm. We had a lot of great discussions, and it was just so much fun having this read as a group.
It was.
And if any of y'all are watching, we hope you enjoy this review. Mm-hmm. But without further ado, it is now time that we brave the deadly fog that surrounds the magical island known as Avalon, where a feud has continued between the flesh eaters and the devils. The Child Thief by Brom introduces a teenager named Nick who has run away from home to escape an abusive drug lord tenant and the gang members that surround him. Yet, before he can actually make a clean break, these gang members surround him with the intent to return him to their leader. And while things start to seem pretty bleak for Nick, an otherworldly being by the name of Peter steps out from the shadows.
But even though Peter saves the day by fighting off the gang, he manipulates Nick into blindly following him into a deadly fog, where they arrive at a magical island called Avalon. And shortly thereafter, we see that Peter has done nothing but take Nick from one extreme to the next.
At this point, this dark retelling of Peter Pan introduces a group of adolescents called the Devils, who remain young as long as they stay on Avalon. And as backstories develop, we discover that Peter had lured all of these children here after he had taken them from the street or killed their abusive parents. But even though Peter did save these children, it's revealed that his actions weren't very altruistic.
Then, after Nick learns more about Avalon and why he was brought there, he finds himself trapped in a feud between the devils and a group of colonists known as the Flesh Eaters. And try as he might to escape Avalon so he can return home to rescue his mother, Nick must participate in a war fueled by religious fanaticism.
The Child Thief by Brom was published in 2009. Upon its release, it received praise from authors such as Kim Harrison, Holly Black, and Christopher Golden. In the author's note, Brom explained he was fascinated by the tale of Peter Pan, but until he read J.M. Barrie's novel, he considered Pan to be a prankster. As he read, he noticed the book had dark undertones, where at times Peter was bloodthirsty and cruel. But Brom's biggest influence came about when he read the phrase that Peter thinned out the lost boys who appeared to be growing up. It was upon reading this, Brom began to wonder how many children were kidnapped or killed by Pan.
Fun facts!
You know what, Connie? I know this story is dear to you. So, for this reason, I will allow you to have it.
You're going to allow it anytime unless you want a knuckle sandwich. So now that we have covered what inspired Brom to write The Child Thief, here's a look at how Brom took a classic and made it his own.
Girl, you got hell in you.
Although Brom didn't want to rewrite J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan, he knew he wanted to create his own world and story. During this time, Brom dug into the myths that inspired Barrie's novel and applied that lore to his own book. Yet his biggest inspirations regarded the Celtic mythology behind the island of Avalon. It was in this land that King Arthur's Excalibur was forged, as well as Caliber. Upon Avalon coexisting with the island Turnanog, which was known as the Island of Forever Young, Brom combined the two islands into one location so that the devils could remain their age forever. Among the characters featured in this work, other mythical beings play a prominent role, such as the Horned One, who was based on the Horned God, which to Christians, the Horned God is the devil. Also, there was Tagnos and his brother Tansgranir, which are actually the names of the two goats that pulled Thor's chariot, and even the swamp-eyed genie Greenteeth made an appearance.
Well, now that we have that covered, it's time to move on to the spoiler segment, which, if you haven't read this book before, we're about to reveal some things that could ruin the experience for you. So if you would like to click away, just scroll down to the comments, and you'll see that we have a pinned comment at the top with a timestamp in it. Once you click that timestamp, it will direct you away from the spoilers and bring you to the thoughts section. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this, so...
Ready, set, go!
Every time. You know what, Connie? I will let you have what you did a few minutes ago, but this is me here, okay?
Sit down and shut up, bitch! This video's a picky pick! I am the star!
Well, now that everyone's had the opportunity to click away, we would like to talk about a few of our favorite moments. Hit it, Picky.
Now, the first moment I wanted to talk about is when Nick encounters the Slough. Now, prior to this, Peter had saved Nick from the gang who considered him to be a rat. And after that, the boys had spent the night having fun, Peter gained his trust. And eventually, Peter manipulated Nick into saying he wanted to follow him. And as soon as the words left his lips, Peter lures Nick to the fog bank that surrounds a magical island known as Avalon. Well, even though this border looks like your typical fog bank, once Peter and Nick start moving forward, Nick starts to encounter dead bodies dating back to the Crusades. And despite the fact that Nick is freaking out, he's wanting to go back. He tries to keep up with Peter, but the two end up getting separated where Nick is confronted by the fog spirits, which are known as the Slough. And during this, Nick is approached by a woman in a see-through dress. And not only is she covered in scales, she also has a tail. Her hair is made of worms. Her nipples turn into tentacles. And her stomach opens to a mouth that can swallow him whole. And as she fades away, he starts to run for Peter. And in the process, he encounters children with grasshopper bodies,
Naked old
naked old
grannies.
late grannies, men with bird beaks. And all the while, it seems like, these spirits are going to be the death of him. Nick makes it to Avalon unharmed. This particular scene spoke to me because it was the first time we were introduced to the fog, and like Nick, had no idea what to expect. But when we went there, it really delivered. I mean, everything about it was so well written with the visuals. It really felt like you were walking through the fog yourselves.
It did,
It did,
yes.
and you really felt Nick's fear creeping in. You felt his confusion, his desperation, and when it was all over, you really felt his relief and his anger. Also, I felt like this moment was revelation for Peter. Now, Peter had brought countless of children through that fog in order to build his army, and he probably never received one single complaint of it. Now, of all the survivors, Nick is the one who stepped up, and he threw out an argument that left Peter stunned. And I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but he started bombarding Peter with questions like, what would have happened if I hadn't found you? Would I still be out there wandering around? Would I still be calling for you? Would I be dead? And although Peter did have some regret and that he put Nick in danger, it did not stop him from bringing more children to the fog.
One of my favorite moments was Nick's initiation.
Oh yeah.
Now, leading up to this, Nick had fallen asleep nearby the shoreline, and Peter left him in the care of the Devils, which the Devils are practically this book's version of the Lost Boys. But when Nick wakes up, he finds himself imprisoned in this cavernous chamber, and there's this fireplace nearby that's big enough to put 3 men inside.
Ooh.
And it appears that there's nothing but dead children pinned up and hanging on the walls and stuff. So, after he's had the opportunity to take in his surroundings, he gets bombarded with this whole group of these devilish looking things that pull him from his cage and tie him up. Then, while Nick is laying there, another devilish thing, which appears to be in charge of all the rest, runs in with a club that has a hook on the end. And before things can get any worse, Nick is able to break free from his binding, kick the thing's ass, and take the club away. And it's at this point that his attacker takes off his costume and starts cheering, "The deviltry has fresh blood." And following that, everyone else who had appeared as these devilish looking things take their costumes off and join in with the cheer. And it's at this point that Nick realizes that this was an initiation and Peter hadn't brought him here to be butchered and eaten after all. And as far as all of the dead kids that appeared to be strung up on the walls, these were honestly nothing more than dummies. Until this reveal, I honestly thought with my entire being that Peter was this evil entity that had no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And when Nick woke up under this circumstance, I really thought he was going to have to do some horrible off-the-wall shit in order to see the next day. So when things went in a different direction, you can only imagine how surprised I was.
Right.
And very similar to how you praised the description of the fog spirits, I really have to praise this moment because the description that was given, it was very hellish.
It really was.
It was really intimidating. And then add on top of that the costumes of the devils, and that's pure nightmare fuel. That's a place I don't want to be.
Me either.
And the funny thing is, even after the reveal happened where this was the initiation, I got the vibe that this group of kids was like the kids in Lord of the Flies, which honestly isn't really a compliment because this made me really feel like they were nothing but pure chaos.
Now, the next scene I wanted to talk about was Gaul's death. Now, leading up to this, Peter had been abandoned by his family and taken in by a forest creature named Gaul. Now, one day, Peter asks Gaul about the shoes that had been sitting outside his house. Gaul tells him they belonged to some boys and girls that he'd eaten in the past. And Peter had asked where they come from. He told him the village, and that he didn't need to go there because the men who were there were worse than wolves. Now, nonetheless, Peter decides he wants to go to the villages. He wants to go kidnap a child to be his playmate. He wants a friend. So he goes to the village and he finds the little boy he wants to kidnap. Now, Peter ends up being seen and ends up being chased through the woods. They're chasing through the woods, and Peter's trying to lead them away from Gaul's house, their house, he failed, unfortunately. After the time had passed, Peter made his way back to Gaul's house, where he saw the villagers had strung him up, burned him, and shot him with multiple arrows. Now, any human, this would have killed him. But since Gaul isn't a human, he was still alive. And from there, the villagers had cut open his stomach, pulled out his guts, and let the dogs disembowel him. Now, after they thought Gaul was dead, they left, and Peter came and cut him down. Now, he is still alive. Somehow, I don't know how, he is still alive. And in his final moments, he told Peter to go kill the wolf that was always taking his food. This scene broke my heart, but it also conflicted me. For example, on one hand, I felt for Gaul because through the years he had been a father to Peter, and when he was murdered, his death was nothing about his death was quick and painless. I mean, Gaul was just sitting at his house, spending the day at home, minding his business, when he was met with the mob. And all I could think was, poor Gaul, nobody deserves that. But on the other hand, although he was that father to Peter and they did have this underlying love, Gaul did eat children when the opportunity arose. But due to his past, it really had me questioning my own sense of morality, because while I should be hating Gaul for the children he ate, because Gaul was never, human to begin with, is eating human children for him any different than eating a lamb or a calf? And because Brom had me getting the feels for such a flawed character, this moment would stay with me and cause a long, eternal debate.
My next favorite moment was what happened after Avalon collided with our reality. So, at this point, the captain and his men had destroyed Avalok's tree and kidnapped Lady Modron, which, because of their destruction, this allowed the fog that had been surrounding Avalon that kept them trapped on that island to finally disappear and allow them to escape. Then, once they reached our current time, which, by the way, current time in this book is like 2006, the captain is hit with the sad realization that his entire family is dead and he has nothing waiting for him here. Meanwhile, the Reverend is convinced that they had been in purgatory and now they have to take Lady Modron and Daniel to the church to sacrifice so the Reverend and his cult can sit at the right hand of God. But luckily, the captain has finally had it with the Reverend's insanity, and he pulls out a gun and shoots him in the face. And as the climax approaches, we see that while the captain and his people had feared the beings on Avalon because they appeared different, the shoe is now on the other foot. Because the whole time the captain and his people had been on Avalon, the magic of that island had transformed them into these monstrous-looking things that our society now fears because they do not appear normal. I really love this whole segment because not only did the Reverend get his comeuppance, but the captain finally was able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I was really happy that he quit listening to the Reverend's ranting and bullshit because it truly felt like the captain was a good guy to start with. However, he remained closed-minded and afraid to speak up because of the power that the Reverend had over everybody. So I was really happy to see him be able to break those chains and rebel. Another thing I really loved about this moment was how it urged to not judge a book by its cover. Which, even though the subject had been tackled earlier on in the book, it just really felt different here for me. And I guess the reason why is because it shows that the shoe has gone on the other foot for the captain and his people. And I think that's a big problem we see with society in general, is they never put themselves in another person's shoes. And the reason why the captain and his people were trapped in Avalon to start with is because they were judgmental towards the island's non-human inhabitants, even
Mm-hmm.
though those non-human inhabitants had feelings and emotions that were very human relatable.
Mm-hmm.
But now the captain and his people are in our world, in our current time, and they appear to be these monstrous things because of how Avalon transformed them.
Yep.
And so now they're seeing what it's like to be the horror show, to be what's not understood.
Mm-hmm.
And that just spoke volumes to me. And I
Mm-hmm.
love how the author just so unapologetically put it that people fear things that are different and things that tend to go outside of what they consider to be the norm. We would like to take this opportunity to bitch. Hit it, Picky.
Today I would like to bitch about Leroy. This little asshole is nothing more than a liar, a cheat, and a damn bully. First off, who voted you king of the mountain? You are not the boss. So I'm going to need you to take the thumb out of your ass and go recognize yourself. Secondly, nobody likes an asshole or a bully. So I do not know what little pixie piss in your berries, but I'm going to need you to get off my boy Nick. For real. He has been on Nick from the get-go, threatening him, getting him all the extra work to do, and then the little piss ain't gonna kill a pixie and sick of you. And nobody likes a liar, Leroy, and that is the only throne you sit on. You are gonna lie your ass off out you were some badass become a devil, when we all know you were crapping your pants while Nick was bucking up to the real danger. And after being a fake ass scrub, acting all buddy buddy trying to save face, you're gonna kill Sikiyu and frame Nick? And Leroy may have been nothing more than a little bratty ass little teenager, but he knew what he was doing. And when he got his, I cheered. I cheered, and I hope it hurt good, asshole.
I feel like my bitchin' won't be satisfied until I rant about those two ignorant hemorrhoids who are none other than the Reverend and Ulfer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for those who haven't read this book, the Reverend and Ulfer are literally the same skid mark, but they've been produced by two completely different assholes.
Mm-hmm.
And between them, we have where the Reverend kills and tortures in the name of God.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have where Ulfer kills and tortures in the name of the lady. And because of them just being so batshit crazy, we see that their sick ass sadistic nature is the result of religious fanaticism.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I'm going to be completely honest here. I don't care what the subject is. If you are as far gone as these two dickheads, then I don't want to be around you. Because there is no saving grace here. You are way too far gone, and I know it's only going to be a matter of time before the Kool-Aid comes out. The Child Thief by Brom was a book that took us all by surprise, and it was completely different than what we expected.
Mm-hmm.
And even though this work does have its horror elements, overall it is a dark fantasy novel.
And as far as characters go, Brom did a good job presenting a cast that made us quickly become invested in their well-being, and Brom knew how to throw a curveball at the right time.
Agreed. And aside from that, this book presented quite a few different themes. Among those, we have child abuse, manipulation, religious fanaticism, bullying, human monsters, and there's much more.
Character-wise, Peter is so very complex. He's like an onion pulling back layer after layer. And for me, he's one of those characters you love to hate. And those are the best kind of characters. And really, Lady Mondrian was really a complex character herself. And in a strange way, when I saw her, I was seeing Maleficent. But out of everyone, Nick was probably my favorite character. I mean, he's smart, he's strong, and he's a total badass when it comes to doing the right thing. And like Connie pointed out, for much of the book, he acted as Peter's conscience.
Although this book presented characters who had no redeemable qualities whatsoever, I felt like for the majority of it, everyone was simply flawed. And as I continued to read, I noticed where even though some characters were polar opposites, they had more in common than what they would care to admit,
Hmm.
especially when it came down to Peter and the captain, as
Yeah.
well as the Reverend and Ulfer. For example, I noticed where Peter and the captain were similar because they both acted on what they believed was right.
Hmm.
But when they saw the light at the end of the tunnel, it allowed them to have a change in their opinion. Which this wasn't a huge change, but it still made a difference. And to me, that represented the demographic of society who does have the potential to grow and learn from their ways once they've been confronted with their errors.
Hmm.
But on the other hand, we have Ulfer and the Reverend, who are two religious fanatics. And
Hmm.
while the Reverend kills and tortures in the name of the Christian God because he believes that's what God wants, Ulfer kills and tortures in the name of the lady.
Hmm.
And they are so far gone that when the revelation came at the end of this book, there was just no reasoning with them. And to
Hmm.
me, they really represented the demographic of person who there's really no help for because they are so hardcore in their beliefs and they are so
Hmm.
willing to do whatever it takes to uphold those beliefs, even if it means harming another individual. Which, of course, these characters are where we get the subject of religious fanaticism. Theme wise, the first topic we would like to focus on is manipulation, because this is presented in a couple of different ways.
For starters, Peter is using manipulation to lure the children to Avalon so they can fight in the war with him. And even though Peter truly believes that the day will come when he and the devils can live in peace, he never really tells the children what will be expected of them.
Also, he really doesn't go into the gory details of what could happen.
Hmm.
And because of him glossing this over to a degree, it causes the devils to develop this deeply seated faith in Peter, where
Hmm.
they would just blindly die for him or Avalon with no questions asked.
Another example where manipulation is strong is when the Reverend steps on the scene. Now, even though he isn't the primary person in charge, his religious fanaticism has elevated him to that level of being.
And because of that, he ends up using the Bible and fear mongering to incite an ongoing war to kill and to also torture. Which, because of him using the Bible as a crutch, no one questions him, and woe be to he who does.
And we thought there were some other examples where manipulation was touched on and everything, like how Lady Modron treats Peter, but we need to move on.
Next up, child abuse is mentioned throughout this book, especially at the beginning where a young girl is an SA survivor of her father. And then later on, we're met with a pretty nasty torture sequence for some of the devils.
And while children seem to get the raw end of the deal no matter what, we feel like this book was showing us the different types of predators that children had to endure.
Another subject this book focuses on is bullying,
Hmm.
which not only is this seen by how the gang members threaten Nick in our reality, but how Leroy treated Nick and a few of the devils in Avalon.
And even though bullying is strongly depicted with these characters, it also seen with how Ulfgar treated Peter as a child and how the Reverend bullied those who were against him.
Which I think this book does a good job comparing child and adult in this circumstance.
Hmm.
And it really gave me the indication that childhood bullies never grow out of their meanness. They just end up growing into being worse adults. Another subject that comes into play is human monsters, which this topic is really big throughout the entire book from start to finish. And some good examples are seen by how the flesh eaters treat those who are different than themselves, and how Gaul warns Peter about men who are worse than wolves.
Also, this topic is seen quite a bit by child abuse in our reality and the brutality of the gang hunting Nick. When we were confronted with the scenario of humans being worse than mythical beings and creatures, it really showed us how we need to become more peaceful not only in our home, but as a society.
Well, even though we would like to continue forward with all of the topics in this book, there's just too many,
Mm-hmm.
and we are short on time as is. But overall, this book did not scare me, creep me out, or gross me out. However, it did hold my interest, and it did keep throwing curveballs that kept me guessing.
Yeah, the book really didn't scare me or anything like that, although a couple scenes did get me in the feels. It's definitely a book that would keep you on your toes.
The Child Thief by Brom had a great mix of horror and fantasy. And to be honest, had it been a little bit more fantasy, I might not would have enjoyed this book as much as what I did, simply for the fact that fantasy isn't my genre. But at the end of the day, I do highly recommend this book because it was a very interesting take on Peter Pan. I quickly became invested with the characters, and I did not see the ending coming whatsoever.
Yeah, I recommend the book. It kept me engaged the entire time, kept me in my toes. And as a kid, I really enjoyed Peter Pan. I really did. So this take really fascinated me. And it's really just a great book to buddy read with friends.
Agreed. That was our review for The Child Thief. We hope you enjoyed it, and I'm really happy that you were able to return so you could review this with me.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
Of course, and this is Memorial Day weekend. I'm not necessarily certain when we'll be able to post this video. Hopefully, it'll be next weekend. But this is us just hoping that everyone had a safe and good time. And until we see each other again, let's see, I think it's my turn to pick a book next time. It is. So, yeah, I have a good one in mind. I'm thinking How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix.
I'm excited for this one.
Me too.
Really,
Me
I
too.
love Grady Hendrix.
So far, we've read all of Grady Hendrix's books together, so it's kind of tradition at this point.
It is. It is.
All right. Well, I hope you have a great Memorial Day.
You too.
And have a good week.
You too.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye, guys.
Well, now that we're at the end of this video, I would like to thank these amazing people for contributing to my Patreon account. As you can tell, some of the names listed here are creators, so be sure to check out their work. And if you would like to contribute to my Patreon account as well, I have a link available in the description section of this episode, where for $5 a month I'll give you a shout out at the end of my videos like what you see here. And if there's a certain profession you would like for me to tie to your name, just let me know and I'll include that as well. Also, I do have a $10 tier available, where for $10 a month, I'll still give you this shout out, but I do creepy photography on the side, so at the beginning of every month, I'll send you over one of my creepy photos. From there, you can print it off or do whatever you like. And if you're able to do this, that's awesome. If not, no sweat. I just hope you return to this channel so we can have a good time together. Also, if you would like to hit me up on social media, links to my Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are all available in the description section of this episode. And if you've not subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell because I do have more book reviews coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I hope you're doing well and sweet nightmares.